Good morning. How are you? I feel like I'm at church. You're all at the back. So the first thing you will notice as I talk to you, that despite living here for 10 years, I'm not exactly local. And forgive me for my accent. Even after 10 years in Texas, I have not lost my drawl. I married my wife from Iowa, and she said, if ever you lose your accent, you shall lose me. So I have found that great incentive. I spent the first 40 years of my life in England, and I have been remarkably fortunate to have had 10 years as managing dairy farms that involved import and export of genetics from North America, then 10 years in the international cattle semen industry, and 10 years in animal identification. All this put together, I'm not sure quite what it means, but it means I have been fortunate to travel around the world. Now, Aaron has done a remarkably good job of building me up as an expert. Well, where I come from, X is something that has been, and spurt is a drip under pressure. So don't expect that what I'm going to share or say necessarily is of great value, but what I want to do is to give you a challenge. And it's a challenge that I hope you will take to your students, and that your students will carry with you and with them for life. We probably should plug this in for what it is worth. You will have noticed related to advocacy. I've started this thing by saying part of the job we have today is to create a fish story for advocacy. What is a fish story? I had this friend, and he needed to persuade his board that what he was going to do in fish was desperately important. And nobody was listening to him. So he went out to the market and bought a bloody great big salmon. Huge thing. And he went into the board and flopped it on the table. And they all sat up and listened to him. It was his fish story. Here, if I wave something big and slimy in the room where you don't expect it, it's out of context. So for advocacy, we need that. Today, a whole new industry is wrapped up around sustainability, and I will use this as the tool. Here's my brief agenda that I'm going to go through. And in the end, I shall give you some tools, I hope. So if you stare at this, we have a perspective. What do you see? Beans. Coffee beans. I think, oh voila. So if you stare, now what do you see? A face. We have to look at things in a different perspective. So this morning's objective are very simple. I want to provide long-term feed security, feed the world, create geopolitical stability, and protect the planet. If we can do this in 30 minutes, that'll be fine, and you can go away and we'll all be in good shape. This is the challenge. This is a story you know. We will have 3 billion more mouths, income will increase, diet will change, food consumption will double, animal protein demand will increase most of all. You've all seen the different predictions. I call it 2050 and all that. Biggest impact is going to be not out there in 2050, but in the next 10 years. The largest increase and rise in population will be in the next 10 years. So the decisions we take today, what we do in the next 10 years, will affect humanity for the next 100 years. That gives us some responsibility. Responsibility as individuals. I like the little saying out there that the great news is that we can start changing things today. Nothing's stopping us. We sit in a very privileged position in the United States. Hugely. 6% of our income we spend on food. If you are in India, it's more than a third, and in Africa, it's around 40%. In other words, we make decisions about food production in the developed world from a position of plenty. We impact dramatically the ability to feed the world by the legislation that we create inside the United States and Europe. But we do it from a position of plenty. When you look at where the population is going to grow, it is not here. We will grow, but gently. The population will grow in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, China, India, particularly. They have some issues with land, energy, water, technology, access to it, trade. This is the element of geopolitical stability. Tunisia. What has Tunisia got to do with agriculture in the United States? How many of you remember the Arab Spring? In the run-up to the Arab Spring, food prices in Tunisia and some of the surrounding countries rose by 40%. We're sitting here with the 6% of our income going on food. Now, if suddenly your prices go up 40%, what happens? The natives get a little restless. When this poor chap in Tunisia decided to set himself on fire because he wasn't allowed to sell his fruit, created a bit of an uprising. And President Ben Ali's first response was, well, we'll give them free bread. We'll try and calm the natives by feeding them better. Of course, we know how well that went. He was a little late. In other words, food is a matter of geopolitical stability. This is part of the graph that I've shown you earlier, why it's important that what we do here, what we do today, is critical. The United States is an engine of protein and food production. When you look at the net exporting and the net producing parts of the world, the US, Canada, South America are critical parts of that engine. Europe today is a net food importer. I am a regulatory refugee. I used to be a dairy farmer. I milked cows. I made food. I was a jolly good chap. I was on the good side. And then lots of people with large bellies decided, you know, we don't need all this technology. We should turn the clock back. We should farm in a different way. And we can let the Brazilians and the Argentinians produce our meat for us. When some 20+% of the income on my farm is derived from subsidies and how well I fill in the form, something is not quite right. Of course, we had a little issue as well, this thing called bovine spongiform ankylopathy. How many of you have been kicked by a cow with BSE? Aha! Another element of uniqueness. It created a political change. And living in the US and working here for the last 14 years, one of the things that I have become extraordinarily conscious of is the necessity for us to keep our social license to produce food, to be the engine that we need to be in order to satisfy global hunger, food security, and geopolitical stability. This is our challenge. Now, we have a few little issues on the way. Just saying that there are other people other than I who seem to think this is important. He's a professor, therefore he must be good. Yeah, you think? Elements of sustainability. This is sustainability has become a big topic. It's a whole new industry. Plenty of your students eventually will find jobs in sustainability, but you have to understand what it means. And I like sustainability because it encompasses so many things. It encompasses first people, the planet, which is also useful, the environment, if you like, and the recognition that there is no sustainability without profitability. It removes the fluffy part of tree hugging. It is sustainability first. We are going to sustain the population. And we are going to sustain the population by feeding it properly, and looking after the planet. We have to match those two things. We have a little bit of an issue. We need an awful lot more food. World Wildlife Fund, not a bad group. They've woken up, and they have been enormous advocates in the last few years, in ways you wouldn't imagine. Jason Clay, head of World Wildlife Fund, at the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, presented this slide, and the recognition, he started from the basis of, in order to preserve species, I need to preserve water. So who's looking after the most land? Well, it turns out that beef farmers, farmers period, but beef farmers particularly, were very important in this process. 87% of the land used for beef globally today cannot be used for anything else other than a ruminant. You cannot plow it up and make tofu out of it. People will starve if we don't take a ruminant. God gave us a ruminant, wonderful thing. It takes all the rubbish that we can't eat and makes this splendid thing called protein, which we, as omnivores, have the ability to utilize. Hurrah! I'm a fan of the ruminant. But he's recognized quite nicely the world isn't any bigger than it was. So where's this additional food going to come from? Because in this case right now, I would normally say to you, and I'm going to illustrate it a bit later, all of you, just take hold of the arms in your chair. Okay, hold your chair. So this is, right now, the land and the water that you have. This is what I'm giving you as farmers. It is what you have. You may have 10% more of that. That's it. No more than 10% more. Now, with that, I want you to double the grams of protein and calories that you produce in the next 10 years. Off you go. When you have decided how you do that, we are winning. But that is my first and biggest challenge to you, because that is the challenge that we are facing in the world. When I said I will present you with a challenge, that is the first one. It is the key one. You are going to feed the world with what you've got, because there isn't any more. That will lead you quite clearly and easily to the conclusions that you are going to farm more intensively, not less. You're going to use more technology, not less. But you will be more accountable for what you do, for every piece of resource that you use, because there's no more. Pretty good challenge, eh? Primary issue we face in the developed world is naive legislation driven by the issue of trust. Consumer attitudes. Our social license. This is one of the key tools that you, as advocates, have a role to play. You have two roles. One is the technology, and the other is the social license. We have faced a massive challenge, and we still face it, of our social license to farm the way we need to farm to produce the food we need to produce. And the issue around the social license is trust. There was a great presentation I listened to at the Alberta Beef Conference earlier this year. And the keynote speaker was a logger from Montana. And he described how his logging business that had been in Montana for generations and managing the trees in this area lost its social license to log. And now, as he likes to say, all we are is one lightning strike away from losing half of Montana. We can't be in that position in food production. So we have to create criteria for legitimacy, to be competitive, and to manage our reputation, of course. But the Center of Food Integrity, there will be multiple things that I will provide you with through Aaron at the end, tools. The tools that you need to communicate with have been created. There are a plethora of organizations that have produced excellent, excellent data that can be boiled down into sound bites. I like the fact that shared values are 3 to 5 times more important in building trust than demonstrating competence. In other words, where we came from was the basis of we are a science-based industry, blah, 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 blah. It is not simply that. It is the power of relationships, the power of trust, of the consumer believing that what we do is safe, wholesome, the right thing to do. I am delighted at the way the industry has begun to cotton on to that. Pork, we care. Global roundtables. The ability to communicate. We have farming families with YouTube videos, singing, connecting, families, opening farms, being transparent about what we do and how we do it. Not making excuses, reasons for why we do it. And that'll be another tool that we need. So earning and maintaining the social license, it's our freedom to operate. So I've already indicated this. I like this slide because it tells you or illustrates precisely what I talked to you about before. Where the need for calories are, and it's not here. I'm saying it's not here. The reality is that we have urban food deserts. Our cheap calories are the wrong ones. We need to eat better. But when you are in a position of saying, I have to make a choice today between the one bowl of rice or a bowl of rice spread. One of the intriguing changes of the 2050 and all that is not simply that there are more bodies to feed, not more mouths, but the fact that our middle class is growing. So we'll add another 3 billion mouths, but the reality is that the majority of the 9 billion, more than half of those, are going to improve their diet. And it goes like this. I go from 1 bowl of rice a day to 2. Then I add an egg. Strange concept, animal protein. I go from this, and then I might add a piece of cheese. Eventually, it could be some chicken meat, pork, and finally, the pièce de résistance, beef. I had a great steak last night. You know, the English and the French call the English le roast beef. In other words, we had this reputation for eating beef. And so for 40 years, I was eating beef and thought it was beef. When I finally came to the US and had a steak, I've never eaten beef before in my life. Every time we get people over from the continent, the first thing I do is drag them out. I said, you're going to have this revelation, sit down. Let me show you what grain-fed beef is like with good genetics. It changes people's lives. A wonderful thing. We make the best beef in the world. Don't stop. So I've used this, I'm going to go through 2 or 3 industries, beef, dairy, I think we say something about pork and maybe chickens, just as tools. It's an interesting thing about sustainability too is you don't just think of sustainability in the planet, you should think about sustainability in your community. And this is one of the roles of advocacy. I was reading last night the job description in the VATAT. You have a big job. You're very responsible. Thank you. I'm deeply grateful that you do this. I went to Ag College in the UK, a place called Harper Adams. It was a deeply responsible place. I remember at the tender age of 13 saying to my teacher, that would have been in 1973. So you can imagine in 1973, this little spotty 13-year-old with long blonde hair and big boots looking like Elton John, saying to his teacher, I'm going to be a farm manager. Where is the best agricultural college in the country? And he said, it's Harper Adams. So I said to my father, Father, take me to Harper Adams. I want to go there. So father made the appointment and off I went and met with the bursar. The bursar was ex-army, flat cap, tweed jacket, jodhpurs, looking at this spotty little child down there. You want to come here? Get your hair cut. But he told me what to do. You need to get this qualification, that qualification, do this, and you can arrive. Fortunately, by the time I went there, I had my hair cut. Trade is pretty important. In the US today, some 22 to 25% of the pork we produce is exported, 18% of the beef, dairy. More than 1.1, 1.2 billion dairy cows exist to feed the world, not the United States. That's part of the engine that we are, and we have the capability to do more. The use of trade to provide technology transfer. Europe, as it began its outsourcing of food program, they didn't call it that, but it's what they were doing when they began legislating their own farmers to the point of uncompetitiveness. Said, here are the rules if you want to export. So we began creating in Namibia, Botswana, and other countries outposts of small groups of farmers who could meet the rules. That's where our aid money went. We put a lot of time and energy into this. In Botswana, the example was traceability. We needed to know that these cattle came from here so that the meat that was processed met all the rules for import. If you take, and typically you deal with the wives, you don't with the guys in these small African places. The wives are desperately responsible because they're responsible for feeding the family. You persuade them to sell a calf. Why would you sell a calf for meat when you can hardly feed yourself? Well, if this year I can sell that calf or that meat for 4 or 5 times the income that I will generate out of everything else, next year I have the ability to buy 2 and to expand and to grow and to feed my family, to buy the food, to buy the medicines that I need. Trade is facilitating technology transfer and growth through a trickle-down effect. I've already told you this. This is something you would not have known. Our imagination, again, is that grass-fed beef on the plains of Brazil is producing the lowest grams of greenhouse gas per kilo of beef. It's not. It's here in the US. Why? Because we are able to produce a very high carcass weight in a very short period of time. It takes you twice as long in Brazil to achieve the same carcass weight. That's an awful lot more methane, a lot more grass, a lot more water, a lot more resources to get to it. So we look at our ability to produce per kilo of protein that we are producing. And the US is incredibly efficient. Yes, it's what we do. I've already told you this. Keep teaching. I've explained this already. Agriculture is food security. It's something to remember. You talk about food. It's not just food, it's food security. We are, okay. If you live in Texas, you probably don't realize this because there's an awful lot of gas and oil. But the reality is that the world is short of energy. We are living in this energy bubble at the moment. You know this? This will create pressure on food production. Because you're short of energy, when we created the 25-25 under the Bush administration, the idea was we would grow 25% of our energy requirement. That led to the ethanol policy, biofuels, and what did it do to the cost of food production? We suddenly had $6, $8 bushel corn and a crisis. crisis in all protein production in the US. It was a distortion. So energy policies around the world impact our abilities in food. We have been very successful. So, we are today using less land for farming than we were 100 years ago. And yet we are feeding an awful lot more people. How did we do that? We have decreased the amount of land by the size of Utah. That's pretty good going. We have discussed this. You spend less on food than anywhere else in the world, and yet you have the greatest choice, the greatest selection of food. Some simple numbers. This will help me. Total area of used for land in agriculture plowed up today is the equivalent of South America. If you added it all up. We've achieved this by legislation, provide money, tell people what to do. Adaptability and attitude of farmers. People accuse farmers of being terribly stuck in their ways. They're not. They are great technology adapters. They move things very quickly. With the right incentives and training, farmers will adapt remarkably fast. They respond to market demands. And typically, in other words, if you look, for example, at changing acres, price of soya, as soya demand goes up, I mean, look at how we are converting land in the east of the United States out of grass into crops. What are we responding to? We're responding to market changes. Constantly seeking and implementing new technology. The early adoption in farmers of technology that make their life easier, that help them be more profitable, that help them look after their land. They are stewards of the land, stewards of their cattle, pigs, chickens. If we go back to using 1950s technology, we need North America plowed up as well. That's how much more land we need if we turn the technology clock back. As I expressed to you before when I asked you to kindly hold your chairs, it's not there. So since we are seen as the answer for both food and energy, we lead to the opportunity. After 30 years of being in international agriculture, this is the most exciting time in my career. Food is sexy again. The world has woken up to the fact there's an awful lot of mouths, we need a lot more food. We need more food. 2 years ago at the Oxford Farming Conference in England, the Minister of Agriculture stood up and said, "You farmers, you need to produce more food." Of course he was shot, pilloried, and said, "What have you been doing the last 20 years in your legislation? You can't wake up in 20 years when you've shut us down and then suddenly say, 'Get going again.' It's not so easy." Tools. Can we do it? Dairy products. We'll take a 50-year period. We are today dealing with 65% fewer cows than we were 50 years ago. It's a lot. And yet, we are producing half as much milk again from fewer cows, which means we are using 54% less food, which means, and that's an amazing thing, since I'm producing 420% more per cow, that the amount of food, glasses of milk per kilo of food I'm using. That's dramatic. Through genetics, through farming practices, it shows what we can do. A 270% increase in production per kilo of food. Beef. 2010, we had 31 million cows. Today we are slightly fewer. Please tell all your friends to breed more cows. In 1957, when we had the same number of cows, we were producing 10.7 billion pounds of beef. Today, with this number of cows, we are producing 26 billion pounds of beef. That's incredible. I can be confident, therefore, that if we are able to implement technologies and do what we are capable of doing, if we have the social license to do it, if we are innovative enough to do it, we will meet this challenge. What's the impact on the environment by this change? We have decreased our total carbon emissions. We are using 30% less land, 20% less feed, 14% less water, 10% less energy, and 9% less fuel to produce more beef. Don't let people tell you that farming is inefficient and destroying the environment. It is producing wholesome, safe, abundant food in an extraordinary way, and a whole lot better than it was doing it 50 years ago. Pigs. Pigs are incredible. So, 2001, we have what we've done in just 9-10 years in pigs. One of the ways we've done it, more pigs per sow. Genetics, technology, welfare of the pig. Most all of you who've worked with animals will notice an unhappy, sick, miserable animal is like an unhappy, miserable, sick person. They really don't perform very well. You wake up with that Monday morning hangover. You know, dairy cows get that too. Oh boy, it's going to be a bad day. We like to look after animals because they do better. So here is the trend. It's this big ship. There's this big storm coming at you. You can't turn this thing very quickly. By the time the chap has got there and set the rudder, a little bit too late, the cyclone's arrived. So good news, we are here advocating for food security. I've told you we are going to farm more intensively, but we have to provide more information, and this is part of your role. It is the role of advocacy. The fish story is quite clearly sustainability. The fish story is if we do not do this, we will be unsustainable. There will be really bad consequences. You won't just be hungry. It won't just be a lack of choice that you will have. It is your foreign policy will be a problem. And Tunisia, the Arab Spring, are just little indicators of this. So, I set this up to say this morning's objective is feed the world, create geopolitical stability, and protect the planet. I believe we've done it. I believe you are highly conscious and highly capable of doing it. That's your challenge, and I'll be glad to help in any way I can. Thank you.
Why don't we take advantage of the fact that Mr. Bolton's here. If anybody has any questions or wants some perspective about, I'm curious, when you talk about coming back from Tel Aviv, Texas is pretty diverse, but what's it like seeing agriculture? Give us your take of what you see globally.
So farmers the world over all have the same genes. It's amazing. I have been, it doesn't matter which continent I go to, if I get on a dairy farm or a beef farm, people are the same. And a wonderful thing is you travel not in a bubble, not in a tourist bubble being taken from one place to another. You get into people's homes. You get onto their farms, you listen to what they want and how they do. People are the same. Their families, how they love and care for their families, how they search for a God. These things are the same. We are the same. Amazing. But your environment is different. So, for example, if you're Wyoe in Israel, Israel is very interesting. It's 8 million people in a place about the size of the Texas Panhandle. 1.8 million of those are Arab, by the way, Palestinian Arab living inside. But it is, in case you've noticed, dry. There's not a lot of water. So they only have 100,000 dairy cows in Israel. But those 100,000 dairy cows are the highest producing dairy cows on the planet. Because they have to be. They have to be incredibly efficient. So utilization of technology in how they produce, how they manage their cattle, and part of why our interest in this area is technology transfer. So, small number of farms, water is critical, we are limited on food, so we have to be desperately efficient. Changes your perspective. If I'm now on the plains in high plain in Brazil, my asset is not my technology, my asset is land. You go around Porto Alegre in the south of Brazil through Uruguay, and there are vast plains of grassland. It's amazing. So my asset there is how I utilize that grassland. Do I have the right genetics for it? So one of the things that I was involved with was in Brazil was how we took the long-eared breeds from the north and mated them with the European breeds to create genetics that fit every one of the environments to maximize production from the environment that we have. This is part of the technology transfer that we are involved with. In Australia, it's not dissimilar to here in so many ways. You get in that Queensland area in the north and the east. It's where the majority of the beef cattle are. It looks a lot like Texas in so many ways. It has a very similar climate and environment. Very hardy bunch of guys working out there too. Used to be a lot of sheep, but there is still a lot of cattle. And they're dealing with drought. They'll deal with drought on one side. They'll deal with hurricanes on another side and flooding. But there they are utilizing the combination, exactly the same as we do in Texas, of extensive land for cow-calf, and then move to concentrated feeding operations closer to where the corn is. So very similar mentality. Move south and slightly east and you go to New Zealand, very different climate. And that climate there is conducive to, it rains, it's like England. You know, one of the things that I do not miss from living in the northwest of England, 6 months of gray and rain every day. I like it in Texas. 6 o'clock in the morning, I open the door and it's 85 degrees. We will see 85 degrees in the northwest of England in about 2 days a year. It hits 90 and it's a national crisis. Everybody's going to die. I sat 2 weekends ago with my mother and father in England, sitting in their little room outside, the little sunroom. It's pouring with rain, because of course it's midsummer, so that's what you would expect in England. And we talk, and we talk, because there's not a lot else to do. And then the sun comes out, and literally as soon as the sun comes out, off we all go outside to breathe until it stops raining again, and then we go back in. My wife has made this observation that all the Englishmen, they have lots of wrinkles here. It's because we spend half our life squinting. When the sun comes out, we're not ready. I'm not armed with my sunglasses. In Texas, I'm wearing sunglasses 90% of the time. In England, we don't. So it's another difference, Aaron. So around the world, people will adapt. They have the same heart, the same mind, the same intentions, but they adapt to their environment.
Okay, so here's another one for you. I'm a big believer you can't give away something you don't possess. Mr. Maynard's down here, and we talk about that all the time. One of the things that we try to do with teachers is give them as much information so they can go back and disseminate and assimilate that into their communities. If there were 3 things that you could identify and say to an educator, to an agricultural educator, here are 3 things that I think you should share with your students, what would those three things be? And then the second question would be, what would you tell a student? What are three things as a student they should be looking at to move forward?
I have had the extraordinary good fortune to have worked with people all over the world in agriculture. The only thing I cannot train or give to anybody is passion. It is the first thing. You have to be passionate and enthusiastic and believe and love what you do. It's number one. If you don't do it. Because your life is very short and you have a responsibility to yourself, to your family, God, everybody. So number one, be passionate. Convey that enthusiasm. In the end, people will catch it. So, have it. Love it. We have so much to do. The opportunities inside our industry for our students today over the next 20, 30 years to meet the challenges that are so obvious are enormous. So be passionate about it. It is the first thing. The other two things, perhaps a little more esoteric. I have a habit of telling my employees, which are not my employees, they are my friends, my teammates, look after yourself, look after your family, look after your friends. If you do not look after these things, you will not be good at what you do. There are many different facets of how you look after yourself. Being a balanced life, but that is the second thing. Be passionate, look after yourself, with your family and your friends. Be whole, because you will not perform. The third thing, I'm trying to pick something. Just do it. Get on, do it. You know, we have a pioneering spirit that came in the United States. It's something that I love. I'm not weighed down by centuries of history of saying, we can't do that. We tried that in 1777. Didn't work real good then. It's something that the Australians and the US have in common. Okay? You don't see a barrier. Okay? Here comes a block. What do? I go over it. I go around it. I go through it. I like to employ Kiwis, because Kiwis, I'll give you a classic example. So I'm from England. I'm used to capital-intensive agriculture. So I need to cultivate this field. Therefore, I need a tractor, and I need a cultivator, and I have to have the best and the biggest, and it's going to work. So I'm showing my Kiwi farming friend how I'm harrowing this particular piece of land. And he looked at everything I got, and he says, what do you need all that for? He says, we just use a brush harrow. I said, what's a brush harrow? He says, we pull down 4 branches, tie it behind the four-wheeler, and drag it round. Does exactly the same job. Do it. Stop seeing objections. Stop finding things that reasons you can't do it. Do it. Apply the passion and enthusiasm you've got. Just get on. Get on. We have a lot to do. I can't wait. I'm going to be dead soon. It's tomorrow now. So 3 things. Does that help?
Excellent. Okay, I got one. Kind of give a technical definition of the difference between animal rights versus animal welfare.
Oh. I have 3 daughters. One is 26, one is 24, and one is 5. I keep trying for the bull calf, it hasn't occurred yet. My 26-year-old and my 24-year-old have a passion for language and theatre. So as they got into their young teenage years, I said, you two should be lawyers. Exploit that passion. And your father is spending way too much with corporate lawyers. So it would be awfully nice if you two could exploit this piece, and then you can keep me and your mother in the way the manner with which we wish to become accustomed to. So off they went and decided to become lawyers. However, they did not choose corporate law. My eldest just completed her master's in Paris in humanitarian law. My 24-year-old is just completing her master's in Vancouver. Notice they chose the two cheapest cities they could imagine to live in. I have to keep selling tags. In international criminal law. So, I'm going to defer the question on the definition between welfare and rights to those two, because it takes lawyers like that to define it. I think one is a matter of perception. There are some basic rights, freedom from pain, freedom from hunger, which I think are inalienable. It's reasonable. Why wouldn't you? And quite honestly, as stewards, if we don't ensure those minimum rights, you're not going to be sustainable anyway. So welfare is the implementation of a right, but it goes beyond. I think animal welfare is what we practice. We learn. Every time we learn, sustainability is an evolutionary process. We listen, we learn, we listen, we learn, we listen, we learn. We change things. The trick, I think, is not to let rights become defined by those who are not part of the welfare process. It's part of the danger. If we allow people who are not part of global sustainability, which means food producers the world over, to take control over our message, to take control over the legislation, to advocate on our behalf, we will end up with rights that are not rights, but are impediments. And I think that's the nature of the question. It is one of the primary motivators for me to become involved and to be excited by this process. I made Allflex one of the founder members of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef precisely because I needed advocates. I needed people who could communicate better than myself. I am an agricultural technology provider. I am biased. If you as a consumer are looking at me and say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because you've got 2 kids in university and you've got to pay for them. So you need to sell. You need to sell. So I needed people to sell for me. What was the great thing about the Global Roundtable was, who's at the round table? World Wildlife Fund, Rainforest Alliance, people that from an ag standpoint you say, whoa, these are the guys who are trying to create the rights and the impediments. But they also can see the value of what we need, they understand the sustainability piece of the planet, and they have to work with us. Then who else do I have? I have Walmart, McDonald's, for example, Cisco. Retailers of food. They're a conduit back to us and a conduit to consumers. Then I have producers, NCBA, Solidaridad, Alianza de Terra, and so and so and so. And then I have the technology providers. So I have each of the components of the whole supply chain, and every group fits into one group or another, but only has one vote. Nobody can co-opt the agenda. And the agenda is simple. How do we sustain the planet, the population, meet all the needs that we want? This, for me, was the first tangible tool that we had to communicate to the world, to try and take control of the message, to prevent naive legislation that will lead to all the issues that I've just discussed over the last half an hour or so. Not sure how long I've been talking. That's part of our job, advocacy, is to do this.
All right, go ahead, right here.
I had a question. Given all of your stats and your information and your numbers that show that we're doing a good job, that show that we're living up to the demand, why do you think it's so hard to convince people in America that what we're doing is good?
Precisely because, as I just said, who is delivering the information? You come back to this trust element. You remember the balance, the trust, the creating relationships. It can't just be producers, technology companies delivering that message. It's part of why I like what you are doing, because you are talking to people every day who are from ag, not from ag, learning about ag. Give them the tools, give them the power, let them go and tweet away. And that's part of the plethora of, so if you look at the information that you can find, Global Roundtable, Elanco, Jeff Simmons, the CEO of Elanco, I'm going to give him a plug, has done a phenomenal job. Go on his website, Feeding the 2050, Sustainable Table, Enough. He has a white paper called Enough that will provide you with tons of this information. In other words, it's creating the tools. Dr. Jude Kappa and Dr. from Washington State University, Dr. Franz Mitzheimer from University of Davis. Each of those guys, those people have created phenomenal tools. Jude has a blog. You can download PDFs, presentations that have all this stuff and 10 times more that are phenomenal communication pieces. They'll give you 2-minute elevator speeches in slides, graphically, that you can just pull out and use. Because it's communication. Why can't we communicate? Well, because we're biased. So you have to have people who are seen to have that relationship with the consumer, talk. Consumers still love farmers. Farmers talking about what they do. That's why the advantage of having farming families being open and transparent and giving them the tools to talk. It's a powerful message. You have a lot of key influencers now. Bill Gates. Bill Gates is one of the greatest advocates for technology and agriculture that we have in the United States, along with Warren Buffett and so on and so forth. So the message is beginning to get through, but we have an awful lot of work to do. So I'm seeing the challenge of feeding the world as not just a technology and implementation challenge. I think we know how to do that. It is in the US, maintaining our social license to do it and to implement it and to keep that role of innovation going. And we have this impediment, it's a trust impediment, and people who don't have the same global vision, or their vision is different. You cannot feed the world on tofu. I'm sorry. If I could, maybe I'd have a different perspective. Does that answer your question?
Let me piggyback on that one just for a second. As you travel around the world, is the influence of like an HSUS and PETA as prevalent in other countries as it is here, or is it just the dynamics of our Hollywood atmosphere in America?
You are behind the times. Europe, the European government was, so I describe myself as a legislative refugee. He was there a lot faster, and we still can't grow GMO crops in Europe. There are 25,000 people per day dying through malnutrition-related diseases. 25,000 a day. So far, nobody's found one dying from GMO grain. Where is your greater responsibility? So, this is part of my passion to say, don't let the same thing happen.
I got a question. Throughout your travels and things, what do you think is the most exciting new technology out there?
Oh, if I told you that, I'd have to shoot you. A very difficult one because I'm going to give my strategy away. It depends on your sphere. So I've had a lifetime in genetics. And genetics in every nature, the advent of genomics is going to be incredibly powerful. We are already working with some countries, Germany, Ireland, for example, where we are now taking DNA samples in New Zealand as well. We're taking DNA samples of every animal. And part of that is we are going to do limited profiles and be able to go back, so starting with parentage and looking for limited number of SNPs. The ability to know how we should what they may be susceptible to, what they will respond to. Genomics, in that sense of managing around capability. You know, when you have students, you stream your students, you test them. You decide, this is how I respond. He responds practically, he responds to vision, he responds to sound. I'm going to work something to make them do the best. So genetics and the advent of genomics like that is exactly the same. It is not the concept of saying, okay, now we understand this, I'm going to take that gene and put it in this and change animals and create a liger or something. It is not that. It is taking the resource we've got, which is the world cattle population, for example, and adapting our technologies to it. So I would choose genomics as one of the key breakthrough technologies that will be implemented across species. There are others.
Okay, let's take the other side of the coin then on that one then. What is probably our biggest hindrance towards telling our story?
I think it was defined by as trust. There's a lack of trust because of the way, lack of trust through lack of understanding. People are urbanized, they're away. You've heard and all understood all this, and it's, we're a shy lot. We talk to ourselves, we preach to the choir, and we think that anybody who doesn't agree with us is an idiot. By and large, we're not terribly open to criticism. We think you're wrong. We've been doing this. My granddaddy did this. Who are you to tell me how to do it? That, incidentally, is a gene that's inserted into farmers at birth. When you are created, it comes out the sky. It's in there. Don't like change. Don't change? I'm changing. So the biggest hindrance is that we are not natural communicators. I mean, farming's a lonely job, too. You know, most farmers, when you look at it, they're out there and they live a solitary life. They communicate with few people, infrequently. They're not naturally gifted with communication skills or desires to do that. I would like to make, and it was a message from the Montana logger, which is part of your business model of every farmer is to take a part of your day, so I have my chores to do. I have to get up, I have to feed, I have to clean, I have to do this, I have to do that. He used to take 20 minutes a day and be an activist. Go on Facebook, go on Twitter, create a YouTube, do something. Say something to the world about how good being on a farm is, how good I am at looking at my land today, how good I am at looking after looking at the water supply today. What did I do today on this farm that was good? And tell the world. Be an activist. Take 20 minutes out of your day to just do that. During the end of the day, you know, it used to be our farmers would write in their log, write in their diary. Each day, here's what we did. We plowed that field today. I loved it when the smell of the earth, when we turned the earth and that smell came out. Tell it. Say it simply like that. You create a human reaction. People want to know that. They want to be connected back to the earth. Give them a tool and a conduit to do it. And don't do it by necessarily saying, do you know, today I saved another gram of carbon dioxide by doing that. Tell it from the heart. Today I had a sick calf. And out in the range, it was cold. This calf got sick. I was able to find it, kept it warm. We got it going again. Now look at that calf. Picture of before and after. That's what I did today. That's a good thing. People want to see that. They want to know that. The fact that what else are they going to see? Somebody's going to put up a picture of a feedlot in the rain. Show them something else. Feedlots in the rain? Yeah, it happens. But do you know how much more efficient we are by having feedlots? The ability to focus our energy in a small space rather than spread it all around. It's phenomenal, the impact of this. Ah.
They want to get into debates.
Yes.
I don't want to debate with them.
Yes.
Kind of just answer the questions, but is to show them the good side.
Yes.
But how can I get people to just de-escalate and at least try to start to listen? Because that's the hard part, is they have their ideas and I can't even get them to start to think about my side of the story.
If you meet a zealot, enjoy the time of day with them. Don't enter into debate.
We're going to talk about that this afternoon in the next workshop. We're going to talk about that very thing right there.
You are going to meet some people who have a completely different perspective and point of view. Don't try and change their mind. You can't. You will waste time, effort, and energy and get yourself in a knot. There are other things to do. Talk to them about how wonderful life is, how happy you are. Don't engage them in this, you can say, we are. Yes, remember there was another great paper given at the National Institute of Animal Agriculture earlier on, and the keynote speaker stood up and said, I am tired of being hunted. I'm in the biomedical industry. I'm producing pharmaceuticals. I am the wicked person on this earth. I am killing your children. I am poisoning your land. I am tired of being hunted. We should all be tired of being hunted. That's why I'm liking this period now, because I have a story to tell and people actually are beginning to figure out. If we don't feed the world, there's a problem. It's going to get really nasty. You think ammunition is short now.